Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for my tardiness coming from our own conference meeting, so I apologize. Once again, the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives is holding a hearing on a topic that, quite frankly, is mainly a state and local issue. I was pleased at last week's markup where the chair expressed a willingness to work with us on a bipartisan basis on issues such as the flow of fentanyl across our southern border and the crisis that it is creating throughout the country. In February, news organizations announced with shock that more than 100,000 aliens had been encountered at the southern border. The White House and Secretary Mayorkas worked overtime to deny that there was a crisis at the southern border. This committee did its part by refusing to hold a hearing on the Biden border crisis as we had requested a hearing. In March, the Republican members of the subcommittee sent you a letter requesting that the chair schedule a hearing so that subcommittee members have the opportunity to hear from and question Biden administration officials about how the Biden administration's failure to secure the U.S. southern border has allowed transnational criminal organizations, smugglers, and drug traffickers to engage in criminal activity and harm public safety. We've yet to receive a response to that letter. Unfortunately, the number of encounters at the southern border has grown each month since President Biden took office, and last month more than 188,000 aliens were encountered by CBP at our southern border. I've taken multiple groups of members to the border over the past several months, visiting from San Diego, Calexico, Yuma, Tucson, all the way to McAllen, multiple times in most of those spots. In each of these areas, we heard and saw the same thing. The Biden administration's policies have created a crisis, and we renew our request to hold a hearing to hear directly from Biden administration officials so that they can be held accountable for the crisis they created. The surge of aliens at the border is allowing drugs and other illegal contraband to flow across the border because Border Patrol is occupied caring for aliens instead of securing the border. I hope that our next hearing will be on this topic. After all, this is the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. This committee cannot continue to ignore the crisis at our southern border and the impact that the crisis is having throughout the nation. I also hope the chair will hold a hearing soon to examine the dangerous efforts to defund the police and the increase in violent crime in American cities. In June, all the Republican members of the subcommittee wrote a letter to the chair requesting a hearing on these issues, and we've yet to receive a response to that letter as well. Don't get me wrong, the issue of fines and fees, I think, is a very important issue. It's one that should be looked at the state level. The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution prohibits the federal government from imposing excessive fines, a prohibition that the Supreme Court incorporated against the states in a February 2019 decision. Studies have found that criminal justice debt is sharply rising across the country, that associated fees lead to a cycle of debt, and that this debt could impede reentry and rehabilitation. But this is largely a state issue. The federal government should not be in the business of bribing states to implement specific policies. Doing so discloses what Justice Brandeis called the laboratories of democracy. Why would we wish to do that? Let the states work these matters out on their own. In fact, many states are already taking a leading role to reform fines and fees in the criminal justice system. When I worked in the Arizona criminal justice system, both as a prosecutor and then later as a criminal defense attorney, I will tell you that nothing was more dismaying to me to see someone be fined, for instance, $100, and yet the surcharge, which is what we called all the add-ons, would be about 100%. So they would end up paying a $200 fine for what fine and fee for what should have been a $100 fine per statute. But my experience was routinely judges were allowed to waive those surcharges in Arizona. They didn't always do so, but we could advocate for that. But this year, the state of Arizona enacted one of the changes that will be advocated for at this hearing today. In April, a change was enacted in Arizona so that Arizonans will not have their driver's license suspended if they do not pay traffic fines or fees. This change is estimated to impact 30,000 people in the state. It is a pleasant change. I cannot tell you how many people used to come in to see me, both as a prosecutor and then later as in representational capacity, whose license had been suspended so they couldn't get to work in a very broad and large metropolitan area that had very little public transportation services. They would lose their license, thus losing their job, thus being in a cycle of problems. The state has now exercised its legislative prerogatives to change that. I hope it is a positive change in the state of Arizona. But the important and salient point here is that the state legislature made that change, that corrective, without being coerced or enticed by the United States Congress. Between February and April 2021, several other states, including Florida, Indiana, my own Arizona, New Mexico, and Oregon, considered legislation that would eliminate fines, fees, and court costs for juveniles in the criminal justice system. And just last month, Nevada enacted a law to end the practice of suspending an individual driver's license or prohibiting an individual from applying for a driver's license because of an unpaid fine or fee. Again, last month, Colorado enacted a law to eliminate certain monetary amounts a juvenile or juvenile's parent or legal guardian in the criminal justice system is required to pay, like fees for applying for court-appointed counsel. These discussions and decisions are taking place exactly where they should be taking place, in state houses across this great country. As I noted earlier, states are the laboratories of democracy and are better equipped to make decisions regarding the fines and fees implemented in their state statutes and municipal codes. In Federalist 45, James Madison wrote, quote, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Yet here we find ourselves in this committee in hearing after hearing or markup after markup discussing matters that are more rightly state issues. My colleagues are looking to impose their wills on the states through grant programs, and I urge that practice to be discontinued. In 1905, there were 4 grant programs. Today, there are more than 1,300 grant programs. This is the problem I think we should be looking at. And with that, Madam Chair, I thank you for your time. Again, I apologize for being late. I look forward to this hearing today, and I yield back.